Well, I think I will go ahead and make use of the time. Welcome. Good morning. This is today's session is rebuilding our way out, supporting CBOs in economic recovery, and the need for coordinated supportive services. And I'm Linda Collins. I'm your moderator for this session. For those that don't know me, I am the founder and the executive director of the Career Ladders Project. We're a nonprofit organization based in Oakland, but we work statewide in California to promote equity-minded community college redesign. We work directly with colleges and also with their workforce, their education, and their employer partners to improve access and completion of credentials that matter in the labor market. We focus particularly on addressing the barriers so that the barriers that impede upward mobility and economic advancement for people of color, for women, and for low-income Californians. I also have my camera off for some reason. Let's see if it'll work. There. My camera seems to be jumping around, so I'm gonna speak, but I'll try to figure that out. I also have the privilege of serving as the board president currently for the California Edge Coalition, one of the prime co-sponsors of this summit, as you know, and we work very closely with Skills for California. We know it's really been a hard year and a half for everyone. And it's taking an all hands on deck approach to really help California not only recover from the economic impact of the pandemic, but to help rebuild a more just and equitable economy. I'm going to switch to my computer screen and see if that helps at all. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I can't start my video. Okay. We've relied on this technology and it's worked pretty well for me up until this moment. So today we're going to hear from a fantastic lineup of panelists who are all themselves working to remove barriers to employment for California's most underrepresented workers. And they're really working to strengthen connections between employers, the public workforce system, and supportive services. So I'm really happy to welcome our distinguished panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them in turn to take just a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and their organization. And, you know, if you've been looking at the program that was published, we've had a couple of substitutions, but we have the same sterling organizations with us. So why don't we just get started? Eric, you want to lead off?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I just want to say good morning and thank you for having me in this space. We got a couple of San Diego folks on the panel, so I'm excited to be in relation and conversation with them. I am one of the substitutes. My director, Mark Philpart, had a last minute inconvenience come up, but you know, I'll try to fill his very big shoes. But my name is Eric Morrison Smith. I'm a policy associate with the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and Policy Link. And I know that we've worked with some of you who are in this space, but for those of you who are not familiar with our work, Policy Link is a national research and action institute dedicated to advancing racial and economic equity. And we advocate for policy changes that enable everyone, but especially people of color, to be economically secure, live in healthy families of healthy communities of opportunity and benefit from a just society. And then the team that me and Mark are on is really a network of more than 200 organizations and leaders working to advance racial and gender justice and transform the systems that are failing boys and men of color, their families, communities. And our work can really be summed up in 4 buckets, and it's probably like 20 buckets, but I'm gonna sum it up in 4 for today's conversation. But we're really focused on winning policy solutions created by and for directly impacted people that like not just tinker around the edges, but try to address root causes and structural barriers. We build power by working together across issues in communities to create a strong movement for racial justice and gender justice. And we really try to deepen our impact and catalyze more wins by creating spaces for learning and deeper connections within our network. And then the last one, which I've kind of already alluded to, we work to dismantle racist and unjust systems that are not only impacting boys and men of color and their families, but also other vulnerable populations, girls, women of color, people living in poverty, and those with disabilities or part of the LGBT community and formerly incarcerated, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. And then just the last thing that I'd like to note is that our work really intersects a variety of issues related to public safety, education, policing, and economic justice. And one thing to note is that we really operate from the lens that all of these issues are interconnected in important and nuanced ways. You can't really keep communities safe without economic opportunities. And we know that our communities often lack critical community infrastructure, partly because of our extreme investment in the punishment system. So we really do this work trying to make all those different types of connections as we do our policy work. So that's a quick overview of Policy Link and the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. And again, thank you for having me today. And I'm looking forward to getting deeper into conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. That's quite an intro. And I'm sure that people will want to hear more about Policy Link's perspective and contributions. Joe, you've just joined us. Could you give us a couple minutes, a little rundown who you are, your organization, what you guys are up to?
Yeah, greetings, everybody. Really delighted to be here. Joe Harity. I'm here today primarily in my capacity as the chair of the California Opportunity Youth Network. The California Opportunity Youth Network formed about 7 years ago, and without too much history, it formed among a group of collected sites that were funded by the Aspen Institute in a first wave of collective impact focused on opportunity youth. And so I lead one of those sites in Santa Clara County, San Jose. So COIN is a policy practice intermediary network of collaboratives, so a network of networks. And COIN is working to transform systems, policies, investments, and narratives to ensure all youth and young adults in California have the opportunity to flourish in adulthood. COIN, we facilitate a statewide network of sites, sort of moving from Northern California down way up in Del Norte at the Del Norte County and Tribal Lands, San Francisco, Oakland, Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Jose, Los Angeles, San Diego, the Youth Build Collaborative of Southern California, and a site then way out in Eastern Riverside County. So we bring together a network of folks to advocate for policy, because we want to make sure that good policy gets made and that good policy is informed by those closest to the ground, both practitioners and young people. And then we want to make sure good policy gets implemented. And so an example of each is we've been doing some work around SB 61. We're pushing SB 111 last year, thinking about how are we connecting, for the purposes of today's conversation, thinking about how are we connecting support and stabilization resources to workforce training programs to make sure that people have the resources they need to stay in. And then also thinking about how that good policy gets made and translated. And so we've also worked with the California Workforce Development Board to submit a waiver for WIOA funding for youth services, so that those can be directed and prioritize our most system impacted, least resource young people. And we're lifting up a Bay Area community of practice to begin to move toward implementing that waiver once it's moved through. So we're connected to a variety of folks on the ground, bringing folks together to act as a network to drive policy change informed by community, and then supporting the implementation of good policy after it's made.
Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate that. Implementation is certainly so important. We'll talk more about that. How about you, Erica?
Sure. Nice to be with everyone this morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Erica Bori, and I serve as the Director of Economic Empowerment for the International Rescue Committee, or IRC. IRC is a very large organization, and here in the US, the IRC works in 25 different communities across the country, offering a wide range of economic development, social services, and other programs. So we are first and foremost, a practitioner organization. We serve about 50,000 people a year in the US. They are overwhelmingly very diverse. We serve people from over 100 different countries. They are overwhelmingly very low income. And we have a particular focus on immigrants, refugees, and others who are new to our communities. Here in California, I am based in California. I'm in San Diego, although I work for our headquarters team, which is based in New York, although these days we're kind of spread all over the place. But here in California, we actually have a very large footprint. So we have offices in Sacramento, as well as Oakland and San Jose, in the Central Valley, in Turlock and Modesto, in LA and San Diego. So we have quite a footprint here in California, and so quite engaged in many of the conversations that are very specific to California. Just by way of a little bit more context, as I said, we are a social services and practitioner organization. So we serve about 10,000 people a year just with workforce development programming. And again, those individuals are overwhelmingly very low income. More than 90% of them are English language learners. More than half earned less than $12,000 a year last year. And so we really work to implement workforce development programs that are serving some of the hardest to reach, hardest to serve individuals in our communities and help move them towards economic opportunity and resiliency. The last thing I will say is, in addition to doing this direct service work, we are very much engaged in a lot of systems level work, as well as advocacy work as well. Here in California, for example, we are the state contracted technical assistance provider for the some of the past and current ELL initiatives to help our workforce systems better serve English language learners. And we are quite engaged in a number of kind of systems level projects and initiatives, both here in California and beyond. And so as much as we are a practitioner organization, I'm excited to also have the opportunity in our conversation today to think about how some of those questions of direct services and the lessons we learn in direct service also intersect with some of the very important systems and policy questions that I know are of interest to many who are joining us today. So very nice to meet you all. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you so much and welcome. Wow, what a span of opportunity and work that you guys are doing. Let's hear from Ken.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken Barnes. I'm the CEO at Options for All. We're a San Diego-based organization. So I learned when we were getting ready that I'm apparently just about a bike ride distance away from Erica. And then Eric actually grew up down here. So it's a little bit of a San Diego reunion here today. We provide services for adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the state of California. So our headquarters is here. About half of our employees live in the San Diego area, around 200 people, and then about 100 each based in Sunnyvale, a couple of dozen in Santa Cruz, and about another 100 in the Inland Empire based out of San Bernardino, and then a few opening our Los Angeles office who promised us that they're going to be bigger than everybody else. And so I gave them budget for the next year. What we do is really go out. We provide services dependent upon, we meet people wherever they are on the disability spectrum. It's wide, and there's no like one definitive thing. So whether it's someone living with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, someone on the autism spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, and the list goes on, we come up with a variety of services. They could be cognitive development, memory issues, physical work, as well as supporting people, what we're going to talk about here today, on the job, and addressing the 85% unemployment rate that exists across the world for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD for short. If I can give you an acronym that we can use, I can stay away from the mouthful each time. And that's, I'm excited about it. I became the CEO here in February 2020. After I'd been a volunteer for 6 years, I would fly back and forth from Sacramento. My twin brother lived with cerebral palsy until he passed away at 99. And that's how I came to my love of this industry and working in it. And when I started here, I became long been obsessed with employment for persons with disabilities, and excited to chat about that and what we can do to really level that playing field and bring some equity into that world. So also, any questions that people have about any topic, I'm an open book, particularly if it's about food or wine, I can answer those questions too. So wherever it goes, happy to roll with it. Linda, you can just throw out anything you want.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ken. I can't believe what a distinguished group we have here. And also I'm really struck by how we really have the intersection of policy and practice in all of your work. And I think that's a really important combination for moving change forward. So let's go. I feel free to enter your questions or your comments in the chat as we go, and we'll be trying to attend to those and work them in as the session proceeds. And we'll try to get to all of them if we can before the end of the time. So Eric, let's start with you. I know that PolicyLink, well, you've been a longtime partner in the workforce community, and you're also currently co-sponsoring AB 628, which I think Joe mentioned recently as well in his introduction. It refills the pot of funding from AB 1111, the Breaking Barriers to Employment Initiative. So, what's different in this bill now? And also, how can folks get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell a little bit about it and give a little bit of history about, why we made some of the amendments that we made. But like you had mentioned, this bill is authored by Assemblymember Garcia and would renew and expand the Breaking Barriers to Employment Initiative. And, basically, we actually helped to get this bill passed, get this initiative established in 2017 through AB 1111. And while AB 1111 provided resources for workforce development training, there were too many community-based organizations that could not access funds due to how the initiative was structured. Initially, you had to be a partner with local workforce development boards to apply for the funds, which just automatically excluded way too many great organizations who are on the ground and who are often best suited to provide the adaptive support that our folks need, especially since they're facing unique challenges to get employment. So over the last couple of years, we learned from the implementation of AB 1111 and our partners who are really focusing on these issues and are trying to make some structural changes to the initiative through AB 628. And I won't have time to get into all the amendments because there's quite a bit, but I'll give an example of a couple of them. On the structure and on that funding piece, we actually made amendments so that smaller community-based organizations can now apply independently from their local workforce development board and access these flexible funds that allow them to innovate and do what they do best. And we did that because our partners were saying that, one, it's very hard to connect with the workforce development boards because they have these very deep relationships that existed for some time. And we also heard from workforce development boards that it could be difficult to do everything that they do and then build relationships with partners that they know they should be connecting with. So that's one of the reasons why we made this amendment, to ensure that smaller community-based organizations could apply independently and not necessarily have that long-term relationship that's often needed. And the other thing that we really are trying to shift in this bill is we want the community-based organizations that really understand the challenges that folks are facing in the community to access these funds and provide the support. I'll give a quick personal story. My pops just recently got out of prison after 24 years. And initially, and I come from the workforce development world, we struggled to find him support in a job because of all the reasons that you could imagine. And a few workforce development organizations would reach out to him and ask him to attend their trainings and be a part of their program. But he used to, rightfully so, call me very upset because folks weren't actually listening to him or understanding what he needed at that moment, which was an ID and transportation support. So eventually we got him connected to a smaller community-based organization that listened and supported him with the necessities before starting talking about the placements and training. And now he has 2 jobs, and it's 100% because that community-based organization met him where he was at, provided the wraparound support and care that we so often talk about, and then also provided, the training and economic opportunities. So those are the organizations that we're really focusing on and trying to ensure that they get access to these funds. And then the last 2 examples that I would lift up right now is we did make a good amount of amendments to the target populations that could be served through the grant. And we're really trying to focus on, centering racial justice and those who have been disproportionately impacted by not only this pandemic that we just experienced, but also some of the long-term systemic barriers that they're facing. In some cases that Coyne could probably relate to on this one, But we made some simple tweaks to the definition of disconnected youth, or not the definition, but who could actually get support. Before working at PulseLink, I had the opportunity to organize councils of disconnected youth. And one of the things that they always talked about is how they could not get support until they were in drastic need or completely disconnected from both school and work. But at the same time, if they were in too much need, they couldn't get help because service providers were concerned about retention and not meeting their placement numbers. So here with AB 628, we tried to make amendments that change that strict definition to also include young adults who are at risk of becoming disconnected, which should ensure that they get support before they are in dire need. And then just the last example that I'll give right now is we also know that due to the pandemic, cases of intimate partner violence increased dramatically. So we made changes so that organizations that provide support for people who are at risk of intimate partner violence, victims of violence, or at risk of committing violence can now get connected to holistic support and the economic opportunities they need. So those are just a few examples of the types of changes that we made in AB 628. And we really do know that we need to make some fundamental changes to our workforce development system and ensure that it's more equitable and inclusive of the Black and Brown and communities who are experiencing poverty, and then the organizations that are best suited to serve them. So we're trying to ensure that AB 628 is reflected to some of those changes that we currently need in workforce development. And then actually, I'm sorry, the last thing that I'll add, and this is something that you asked me to speak to, AB 628 has currently passed out of the Assembly. It actually got through without much resistance. And now we're just waiting for it to get referred on the Senate side. But we do know that it's going to take a similar track as it did through the Assembly. And if you would like to support, the things that we're really asking for right now is send in a letter of support. In a second, I could throw in a link to our letter of support, and you can send that in through the advocacy portal. And then the other thing is we created a one-click email tool that basically will automatically send an email to legislative leadership and the governor, asking them to ensure that this initiative is fully funded. We have a $50 million ask right now. So those are the two ways that you could support pretty quickly, and I'll be sure to throw those things in the chat so you have access to them.
Thank you so much, Eric, and also especially thank you for sharing and grounding your work in your and your dad's experience. I'm seeing comments in the chat, just thanking you for that and all the work that you guys are doing to get 628 passed. And I think you kind of queued Joe up, in terms, Joe, he was mentioning particularly how 628 would change the approach to youth. And I'm kind of curious if you want to comment on that. And then just more broadly, how you as an organization that's focused primarily on serving youth in the workforce system, you might elaborate a little on how their workforce needs might differ and, how COIN is addressing that.
Yeah, and I'll just note that one of my partners in crime, Sean Hughes, is attending, and so Sean may pop in the chat there to augment any of my comments. But I think first of all, so we're specifically talking about SB 61, which is a bill that we have sponsored with Senator Hurtado's office, and sort of I might submit that it is complementary to 628, and what it's focused on learnings that came out of the Lifting Families and Children Out of Poverty Task Force, and really the recognition that folks need money, that there are a variety of things that get in the way when vulnerable folks are trying to complete workforce programs, particularly young people. We often hear childcare, transportation, things that they need remedied. And sometimes we do a little bit of we offer people services rather than just the cash they need to solve their problems. And I think there's a balance of where both are necessary. And so I think Eric just spoke eloquently to 628, and we're supporting SB 61, and I think they're complementary in that one is about what types of services and community-based services that are culturally competent, located in places with organizations that folks trust? How do we have more of those, and how do we have more resources, essentially straight up cash financial resources that people can use to solve the problems that are occurring for them? So those are the things. I think there's an interesting moment where we can really invest in vulnerable communities and in workforce development. That really came out of some listening that we did to our peer communities across the state, and we routinely hear, particularly in this moment, in this last year, that basic needs are just an incredible priority for folks. That the lack of access to basic needs is a primary barrier in completing the training programs that young people know are critical to them achieving self-sufficiency. And even if in the face of some difficult choices, they choose to pursue those training programs, often at cost of the ability to earn an income in real time, those barriers frequently resurface and bump them out of those training programs. Small amounts. I get a flat tire. I don't have enough money to repair my car. I can't get to my training program. I got to work now to do this. So really thinking about how we much more artfully and tightly pair basic need supports to training programs to help young people complete the journey that we all want them to be on is what we're after with SB 61, and what we're thinking a lot about as we listen to our communities and partners. We know that there are, I think the last note that I would make sort of with regard to that invitation, Linda, or last two notes, with our Bay Area Bay Area Transition Age Youth Workforce Initiative, where we're moving this waiver through the state, sort of again, similar and related to Eric's notes on changing the definition of disconnected youth. Exactly what Eric said, the system is sort of designed right now to put people in an impossible position. We're gonna wait till you're actually out of the system that we want you to be in, education, or we're going to wait till you've so deeply penetrated other systems or encountered such difficulty in life that a lot of agencies that are disincentivized to provide services and support. And so we're thinking about how do we change language, and that's the waiver that we've helped the California Workforce Board to submit. That is sort of a subtle shift in thinking about expenditure requirements. Moving from 25% this is a little technical, 25% in school youth, 75% out of school youth for WIO at a 50-50, that they can, but increasing your in school youth, you need to expend that on young people who've experienced systems. And so we're thinking a lot about how we want young people to be in the education system. We don't want them to ever leave. And when they penetrate systems like the justice system, the child welfare system, we want them to be out of that system as quickly as possible. And we also know that there's this really tricky moment of the eligibility game. And you may complete high school, and if you do the right thing and enroll right, or the right thing, one of the right things, enroll into community college or a training program, that can actually cost you access to other key resources that would be directly supportive of your ability to persist in that program. Again, this is us listening to our network of sites across the state and really trying to learn and think about creating policy solutions that can solve that. And then on the backside, we have our Bay Area Workforce Collaborative that we're just beginning to stand up on the backside of that waiver work, and helping boards to really begin to align to a best practice model for serving system impacted youth that is built on what LA was able to create through the P3 waiver. And there's a lot of lingo in there, I know that. But we're thinking about how do we, to the point of this session, coordinated supportive services. When we talk to young leaders in our community, through in Santa Clara County, through our Youth-Led Change Initiative, young people are incredibly artful to say, it was never this program or that program. It was all of these things working together that allowed me to be where I am now. And so we need to do the work to create systems that work together, programs that work together. Yeah, that's probably enough for me.
Yeah, I'm really struck by how both of you have sort of pinpointed the need for nuance in the policy as we try to think about the role that CBOs are playing in knitting together and bridging across these systems so that the persons who are needing the services and who are advancing in the economy, really so the resources are following their trajectory. And I really appreciate that comment. And also the need for basic needs supports in across all of the systems and for clients. Eric, did you want to comment on any of Joe's mention on 628 or?
No, I just completely agree with what he said. Definitely think that they complement one another. Sorry, that's my buzzer.
I see that Sean, your colleague, has put some more information about SB 61 in the chat. It might be helpful also, Sean, if you have a link to any material on it that people might want to follow up on. So let's bring in another set of considerations, really, that's part of this bigger picture. Erica, your organization is focused on immigrants, and California is really proud to call itself a home for more immigrants than just any other state. So can you tell us a little bit more about the barriers that immigrants are facing in the workforce system, and also how could we be part of closing disparity gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I might start by picking up something that I think Eric mentioned well, and Joseph was getting at a little bit as well, which is, one of the barriers for a lot of these populations in terms of their access to the workforce system is simply that they're not going to walk into the door of the workforce system. They come in through the doors of small community-based organizations that are in their neighborhoods, where the staff working there look like them, speak their language, and I think that in and of itself, it's not like a barrier that I would want to attribute to that person, but I think that it's something that we as stakeholders in this conversation really need to recognize, that the on-ramps and the first landing spot for most of for many types of populations, which I would note, by the way, are often the priority populations that are statutorily spelled out in WIOA. They're not walking in the door of an AJC. They're walking in the door of IRC's community-based office in El Cajon in Eastern San Diego County, or in the CBO that Eric's father walked into. Those are the places where people are going. And I think that's a really important thing for us to kind of think about. And obviously AB 628 and others are really trying to lift that up and acknowledge the role that these CBOs play within the workforce system, even though I think in many communities, they're still not really traditionally thought of as, quote, workforce system providers. And so I think there's more we might want to talk about in that space. In terms of immigrants themselves and kind of some of the barriers they face, I mean, I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to be particularly new to folks on this call. I mean, we know learning English language is a barrier. We know that even beyond English language learning, there are often misalignment between the skills that someone might bring from their home country and the skills that are needed to enter living wage work in their local community. So there's kind of that skill gap that folks would face. To me, those are actually the ones that are most, I think, known and recognized, and we tend to see policies and systems that address those, right? We have a system of ESL classes. We have, opportunities for skills training. We're trying to bring those things together a little bit more through things like integrated education and training and co-enrollment between WIOA Title I and Title II and things like that. There's a lot more work to be done there, but just to say, I think, broadly speaking, if you ask someone on the street what's one of the biggest, barriers that someone who's an immigrant is going to face in moving into living wage work, they'll probably say, well, I probably need to learn how to speak English at a level that would enable them to do that. I think the one barrier that I want to lift up that I think is so critical, and I think Joe was actually kind of touching on it as well, is one of the interesting things about immigrant populations, both in California and nationally across the US, is they historically have higher rates of labor force participation than non-immigrant populations. So they are more likely to be working. They are also more likely to be living in poverty, right? And so you kind of have this challenge of many of the immigrants in California that we would like to see be able to move from those lower wage jobs into higher skill, higher wage jobs that offer opportunities to earn family sustaining wages. The challenge is that they are working, and in many cases they're working more than one job, and they also might be doing some gig work. They might be doing seasonal work if they're part of our agricultural labor force and that type of thing. And I think, one of the real barriers to helping these people advance in their careers is, quite frankly, the fact that they are working, and they are working out of economic necessity. And those two things just don't square very well. So it might sound strange to say that one of the biggest barriers, and I say this again wearing my service provider hat, but one of the biggest barriers that people face is simply that they are working and they can't take the time to upskill and move into other jobs. So very briefly, to kind of pivot towards some of the solutions, I think, from where I sit, one of the most important things that the workforce system can do is get better at serving people who are stuck in low wage, sometimes low skill, not always, sometimes it's medium skill work, nonetheless low wage work. Get better at serving people. We have a workforce system that in many ways is still best suited to serving someone who is unemployed, right? I mean, and has the ability to, our eligibility criteria favor individuals who are unemployed or earning little to no income. Our training options often are very much better suited to someone who can commit to attending classes for 4 months, right? If you have a job, especially if it's shift work where you don't make your own schedule, that's just not really a tenable option. So I think first and foremost, I would like to see our workforce system get better at serving people who are already working. I think the other thing I would say about that is that's not just good for immigrants, that's just good for people, period, right? This is not unique to immigrants, that the challenges of accessing the workforce system are in part the fact that the very people that we might want to access it are, stuck in these low wage jobs. I would definitely emphasize, as Eric and others have, the importance of partnering with CBOs that are trusted, that are in the community, that are serving immigrants. It's especially important for immigrant populations who have, again, language barriers. It is unfortunate, but even in 2021, I regularly hear of AJCs just flat out refusing to serve someone because they don't speak a language, they can't get an interpreter, they won't provide translation services. You might think, no, there's no way that that's still happening. It absolutely is still happening, right? So it's really important that we partner, that our workforce system partner with CBOs who has the trust of this population, who has the ability to speak their language and engage them with services, and that we have those kinds of resources. I would also flag, and again, AB 628 does this well, for many, many years, our workforce systems have partnered with other community-based organizations, but done so in a way where that the resources, the WIOA resources, do not reflect the level of effort that partners are playing in this. So it's very common to hear a workforce board say, oh, or a workforce system say, we work with all of these different partners, and all of these different partners refer clients and they bring them to the AJC and they help them navigate through the whole process. And then if you kind of look at the fiscal back end, you realize everybody's doing that work of helping them serve the priority population that they're supposed to be serving without actually being resourced to do it. And so I think that's something we really need to think about as we think about partnership. The very last thing I will say, and this comes from a really good conversation that was in the panel that I got to listen to yesterday. I'm so excited that there is a focus on job quality, because I think that matters a lot in our workforce system. And the notion of high road training partnerships and those types of things. I want us to all be very thoughtful to make sure that as we push to make sure that the workforce system is focused on high quality jobs that pay living wages, that are good jobs, that we don't inadvertently leave behind all of these other populations. Because if you come in the door and you're an English language learner, or you come in the door and you have a developmental disability, and you have a workforce system that's very focused on a higher skill, higher wage job, or training programs that have really good job quality, we need to make sure that we aren't then leaving behind all the people who maybe aren't quite ready to participate in a program that is focused on a job that pays $25 an hour, because there is a need. There's a space between I didn't graduate from high school and I'm earning $10 an hour and I don't speak English all the way, you're not immediately going to be ready to take a 1-year biotech training program so that you can get a $28 an hour job. And while I think it's important that our workforce systems really do continue to prioritize job quality, we need to make sure that those equity issues don't fall off the map as we do that. It's a balance. So I will stop there, but those are some of the things that we've been thinking about.
You've really raised the issue of how we scaffolded that trajectory to make sure there's equity all along the way, and that it's possible to move up. I want to, it seems like a really good time to bring you in, Ken, because you're also talking about a significant portion of the labor force. So something like 25% of Americans have a disability, and they experience twice the unemployment rate than those without. And so it seems, particularly thinking about this overall conversation, it would be helpful to kind of fold in more about the work that you are doing to bridge that divide, and also particularly for those that are already in the workforce with developmental disability.
Yeah. You know, thanks for that question. One of the challenges is that, you know, there's a significant employment challenge with persons with disabilities in America. Now you add in an intellectual or developmental disability, and it drives that up. It runs about 85%. And so it's a major issue. I actually wanted to, it connects to something that Erica raised about some of the challenges within immigrant families. So we provide services in a lot of languages. I mean, our employee force, you walk into our office, you think you've walked into the United Nations, sometimes with some of the phone calls that are happening. And particularly a lot in immigrant Asian communities, particularly Southeast Asian communities and around our San Jose operations. And then down around our headquarters in San Diego, obviously there's lots of immigrants, probably a good quarter of our staff speak Spanish because the families of the people we serve are either not English language speakers or limited English. And so what that does is it adds a layer of complexity, right? So you have someone with a developmental disability, you have a family. We provide services. I don't ask questions about like, what's your status of immigration? Like, I don't care. It's like, see somebody needs a need, we kind of jump in and do it. And so that brings our staff ends up really engaging the whole family is what happens, right? Because they're playing translator with them, with a doctor's appointment with their loved one. But in that comes the question of employment, because now we're trying to find work for their son, their daughter, who's an adult, who someone won't necessarily hire. And so there's other things that you have to add in. I think that's where it's really important that links to something that Eric pointed out, that community-based organizations engage kind of upward with larger stakeholders on behalf of the people we serve. I'll give you a specific example. I'm a board member it's called the San Diego Regional Economic Development Board. Now the San Diego EDC is kind of assumed this big, large thing. And I am kind of it was a funny conversation initially. They're like, so you're it? I was like, yeah, you know, we provide services. You do workforce development. I want to talk about disabilities. I don't think they expected disabilities because I look different than I think what they were expecting to come out of my mouth. And the thing is, I think we have to be in those conversations. And others, like right at that table, that's shaping where it goes. And what you'll find is they're very receptive audiences. And I think it's our responsibility to educate those on what the needs are of the community, rather than maybe throwing a rock or stone. Oh, you're not doing X. Well, get in there and explain what needs to be done. And what we found is a lot of reception. So for example, one of the big changes we made last year is we no longer beg somebody to hire someone from our population. We tell them about the advantages of having somebody living with a disability working for them, because it really is like the greatest worker that you will ever encounter in your life. Imagine somebody who wakes up every morning, cannot wait to go to work, is bummed when the workday is over, and is excited, does a job. In fact, we call it what we find their superpower, because sometimes, for example, the disability can cause them to focus on one particular thing, and that others see that as a challenge. We just change it to, well, what's a job that if you're focused on one particular thing, you're like the greatest worker there. So for example, we have some people that we've placed in web editing and film editing and things like that, because it's focus on, anything that's there. It's the same whether it's a partnership with Home Depot or Safeway or one of the other local grocery stores here. The point is, if you go out and work on behalf of the people that you serve and say, let me tell you why you want them, people will jump forward, and they do it every week, one after the other. Policy-wise, there was the other thing that's a little bit different. I come from a little bit more of a advocacy background and into this job. So we are supporting a bill, SB 639, which is out of the Senate and over to the Assembly. It's a great bill. It bans sub-minimum wage employment. So what a lot of people don't know, there was a well-meaning piece of federal legislation in the 1930s that allows businesses to pay people with disabilities less than the minimum wage. Basically, the theory was you had people returning from war, they were disabled, you needed to find work for them, and in this factory, they couldn't do work at the same pace as others. Again, not done with evil intent. What does it turn into? Fast forward 80 years. Well, you pay somebody with a developmental disability $2, $3. It's actually an average of $3.34 an hour. And I think that's a human rights violation. As soon as I learned about it, I banned it. And I lost our largest donor. And then we found more donors, because people will back you if you stand up for the thing that's right. And then we found some other supporters. So Disability Rights California got together with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, and they co-sponsored the bill. And then we testified on it, and it's moving ahead, and it jumped out 31-2. So I think that was a pretty good showing for a bill that was underwater. And I bring that up because it's about finding ways that to change the system, right? Because if the system says it's okay to pay somebody less than a minimum wage, people will pay them less than the minimum wage. And so, like, step one, let's say it's got to be $15 an hour, and I'll leave you with this on that. And I know, Erica, you have a background in economic development, and the argument I said to someone was this: if the unemployment rate is 85%, in an industry where you're allowed to pay someone as little as $2 an hour, it is not an economic issue. Because if it was, at that rate, you would have almost 100% employment. It's an issue of equity and inclusion. It's an issue of education. That's why you're still at 85%, no matter how low it goes. So let's get rid of that false narrative, kick it up, and then move forward. I'm excited about where we're going. There are about 40% of my industry that thinks I'm the devil, and I'm okay with that. And because my hope is to blow up their entire organization and see them go out of business. Because if you are making a living off the back of somebody making $3 or $4 an hour, I've got no time for you. And I really do wish that you fail. And I do not believe that you can say that these people can't do more complex work with a little bit of help, a little bit of support. I know later we're going to talk about what are things that the legislature and the governor can do, and I'll explain some things that are in motion there. So thank you, guys. I'll kick it back to you, Linda.
Wow. I was going to ask about following up, Ken, on your point about the importance of engaging, kind of what you called engaging upward with larger institutional structures and actors. But I also heard, really a powerful and principled statement about how we should engage with employers. And I just want to know if anybody else would like to talk about that. What's successful? What do you think we need to do there?
I think that question, we haven't touched too much on kind of that employer engagement piece, but I do think that's an important part of it. And I have no doubt that kind of everybody in this group, connects with that issue. And certainly our workforce system, it's set up as a dual customer model, right? There are the individuals and there are the businesses. And so there's always kind of attention to that. I think one of the things that, as a workforce development services practicing organization, right? So we serve people and we have to place them in jobs. So, as an organization, IRC works with over 1,000 different employers across the US. So we work a lot with everything from, hospital systems to meat packing plants in rural West Texas, right? We do a lot of different kind of employer engagement. And I think that, one of the things that is really important to kind of keep in mind through all of this is kind of that point that Ken made, that this is about, businesses don't hire people out of a charitable intention, right? Businesses hire people because it makes sense, because the person's is a good fit for the job and is going to do the job well. And so I do think it's important that all of the conversations we have around this, all of the broader policy conversations, for example, about how do we incentivize employers to do X, Y, or Z? How do we incentivize employers to hire individuals who, are justice involved or other cases? It is important to really keep that in mind, that businesses are businesses and that's how they make hiring decisions. I think that's one of the many sort of lessons learned that I think has stuck with me over the many years. The other thing I would say related to the workforce development system and employers specifically is, I think one of the challenges is that in some cases our workforce development systems may or may not be engaging with the types of employers that are employing a lot of these workers that come from the populations that we all been talking about. Many immigrant people of color, especially women of color, are working in small or medium-sized independent businesses, where, or in some cases they might be working in something like home health care, informal childcare, all kinds of different roles. And to be honest, these are not usually the kinds of businesses that are sitting on workforce development boards holding those positions. And so I think that there's sometimes kind of a gap between the types of employers that are doing so much of the hiring and that are the potential site for things like work-based learning and that kind of thing. And that those employers themselves are not necessarily fully engaged with the workforce system. I mean, the local 40-year-old taco shop down the street from me here in San Diego, I mean, it's like 3 guys, and I am 100% sure they have never been to a workforce development board meeting, right? They're just not going to go, but they hire immigrants, right? That's where these people are working. And so I think it is one of those challenges for our system, and it's a hard challenge, right? I don't say this really as a criticism of the workforce development system, but just to say it's a system that was designed back when the idea was, oh, the workforce development system could work with the 2 big factories in town around workforce development needs, and now we have a model where so many folks, especially these priority populations, are, distributed throughout communities in very different forms of, businesses, and they might be gig workers or contract employees in some way. And I think that's a real challenge in some ways, in really thinking about how do we effectively partner and engage with employers in this space.
Eric, jump in. I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, I was listening, and and one of the things I just wanted to add is I loved a lot of what Ken had to say, especially around how we are talking to employers about the populations that we're serving. Especially, I remember when we used to talk about disconnected youth, like we were always talking about like achievement gaps, skill gaps, and almost like stigmatizing the young adults as we're trying to tell employers that they should hire them. And I think that we should really think about how we talk about the people that we are serving, and find that balance of saying like, hey, these young adults are experiencing some real challenges to employment, but at the same time, they've actually overcome all these barriers and are trying to get connected to an economic opportunity. So I think that there's some balance there that we definitely got to work on. And then the other thing that just came to mind when talking to employers, Ken, you had brought up EDC, and I actually love EDC. I think that they're doing some great work. And one of the things that they're really talking about right now with employers is how can we provide more power for workers in the spaces that we're trying to get them jobs. And I think that that's an important conversation to be having with employers, because we spend 1/3 of our lives working. And I always joke that if you're in the nonprofit space, it's really around like 60% of our lives working, because we're always on the clock. But that time shouldn't be spent feeling disempowered in the place that you're spending so much time. So I think that there's some important conversations that I think that we could be having with employers right now about how we could provide a little bit more power, even if they're not going to, raise the amount that they could pay them right now. And I think that this pandemic, there's a lot of employers who are looking for people to hire and are struggling with that. So this is probably a really good time to be having those conversations.
Joe, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just, one note that's in my head about with regard to the employer engagement conversation, and we've done a bad job of cracking this code in California. We had the California Career Pathways Trust, which pumped, $500 million in specifically around some of this type of work. Now the Strong Workforce Program, a variety of other things, plus the whole, sort of workforce board system. And I think in my observation, part of the difficulty in cracking that code is that it's often a supply side focused conversation that fails to appreciate the nuance that business is navigating and the need for them to think about competitiveness. And I know that's not always a popular notion to put back. And Linda, as somebody who's working the career ladders project, you've been thinking about these things probably for quite a long time. But it just feels like that we have to move towards like a next level, a more artful conversation that better appreciates the nuanced drivers and like wins that each group needs. If we're really going to crack that code here in Silicon Valley, in San Jose, we've done a pretty bad job of figuring out how to get some of the biggest employers in the world to think about alternative talent pools of some really incredibly smart and talented folks from non-traditional backgrounds. And so it just seems like that conversation has to move dramatically forward. And that's one of those key equity drivers. And if we can unlock some of that, we'll move to a new level together. So a better, different employer engagement conversation, different methodologies, different modalities, but definitively moving away from a supply side oriented conversation to make sure that business knows that it's coming to a safe conversation. And then the last twist on that is Santa Clara County has 18,000 employees. Government jobs have been a traditional route to the middle class for a lot of folks. I'd really like to see government, local government, become a much more effective employer partner, not just a funder to a system.
Both of you, thanks so much, Joe. Both of you, Joe and Eric, and also Erica, sort of really talking about the importance of the shift to really much more asset-based thinking. I think that's also a huge issue right now that we're seeing in the community colleges, which is rather than sort of suggest that it's the conditions that people are coming from that cause the problems, it may be that our institutions are not ready to serve the people that are in our communities, and that recognizing the incredible resilience, the linguistic diversity, the cultural diversity, the perseverance and the talent that they bring really is an asset in the labor force that companies need for the future. And I think that shift is really a critical one. And there are ways in which, whether we're talking about the community college system or we're talking about workforce boards and the incentive structures that drive them, often the categorization of individuals into categories actually reinforces this notion that that they're needy or something like that. And so I'd love to, Erica, you sort of suggested that in the way that you framed immigrant communities trying to enter the workforce. I was just wondering if you could comment more on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would very much, I think, agree with, kind of some of the points Ken was bringing up among others, which is, it absolutely is critical and important, but also importantly true that, that all of these populations that we're talking about, that they are bringing tremendous assets, not just to their communities, but to employers and to economic development. and that they are critical. I mean, I always cringe a little bit when we talk about the role that any one individual or population plays in terms of fueling economic development, right? You can see all these stats about immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs, and then they generate this much capital and blah, blah, blah. And that's all good stuff. I cringe because it's like, right, but they're also people like everybody else. And we value people because they are people, not because they are economic contributors in a community. But the reality is that is also true, right? That they are economic contributors. And I think, and for those of us who, have been working in workforce for a long time, I think healthcare is a really kind of interesting and good industry example. At IRC, we do a lot of career pathway programming in allied healthcare. And, this is an area where it does not matter who you talk to, in what state, in what community, rural, urban, it is undeniable two things. One is that there is just continued growing demand for people to fill allied healthcare jobs. We're getting older as a population, we're getting sicker as a population, all those kinds of things. Certainly this was, front and center during the pandemic, but also the important role that immigrants and others are playing in filling those jobs. And in addition, not only are we getting older and sicker, but we're getting more diverse as a nation. And certainly California is, way the outlier here and really leading the nation in that regard. And that means that we need healthcare workers who do have those cultural skills, who have those language skills. We know that that leads to better health outcomes for people, for families, for communities, and that kind of thing. And so I think, it's one of those areas where, to perhaps Joe's point, I think we sometimes do ourselves a disservice if we really talk about it from a supply side perspective only, like, oh, look at all of these disconnected at-risk youth, right, who we now call opportunity youth, but for many years referred to as at-risk. Look at all these people. What are we going to do for these young people? How are we going to get them connected to education and work? But to really kind of zoom out and look at that broader system of, what do our communities need? What do people need? What does industry need? And try to kind of look at that all together. Because when you do it that way, it doesn't seem like, oh, here's a problem to fix among this population. It's more like, let's put all these puzzle pieces in a way where we are also foregrounding equity. And I think the solutions tend to bubble up much better when you look at it that way.
Ken, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I just briefly on what Joe said. So I am not from the nonprofit world. I am a purely private sector guy. And so I was a little bit of a fish out of water when I came in and started talking to employers, talking about shareholder value. And a couple of people freaked out on me. But the thing is, shareholder value goes beyond just dollars and cents. I said this for years when I used to do M&A work. And the thing is, hiring from our populations makes their company look good. And if I learn anything else, going back to kind of coming up I got the rest of the panel by a couple of years. So coming up like in the 90s in my old sales side, I was always taught that never place a value on why somebody does something as long as they do what you want them to do. I don't care if someone says, oh, I want to hire your population because I think it'll make me look like the greatest employer ever and I can do social media about it. Or if they say, oh, it's just because it's in my heart. Yeah, whatever. If you're going to hire my people, then hire my people. I'm cool with that. And I think it is framing it to what's in their best interest. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's actually what we should be doing.
Any other comments on employer engagement? Eric, I don't know if you had a chance to finish that conversation.
Yeah, no, there's not much more that I can add. I feel like, people, really add a lot of nuance to the conversation. So I have nothing else to add right now.
I am curious, we focused a lot in discussing the workforce system. We focused comments a lot on the workforce boards and the job centers. But I'm curious, I think you brought it up, Joseph, community colleges are the largest workforce provider in the state. And the interface between community-based organizations and community colleges is potentially very powerful, but also often problematic. So I'm really curious if you guys have any thoughts or recommendations in that area.
folks don't mind, I'll jump in.
Sure.
So a couple of things that are on my mind. And one of the features of I think Erica and maybe Eric had mentioned it, but for historically excluded, historically marginalized communities, our observation and learning is that they have very little trust in institutions, rightly so. And yet our institutions are like sort of inherently institutional centric and aren't observing that they aren't their best messenger, and that a variety of the efforts that they do engage in exclude key messengers. We did a social innovation fund project around the Jobs for the Future Back on Track method for helping disconnected young folks go back to high school, transition to post-secondary, and stick it out in the first year. And we achieved really outstanding results, and the whole national pilot project got really outstanding results, particularly for boys and men of color. And it touches on a feature I think that a couple of folks have mentioned here. And I think about front doors, I think about on-ramps, and I think about navigators. We have to honor or it is imperative that we honor the trusted relationships that people already hold. That, Eric sort of mentioned the deficit approach that often low income system impacted folks in East San Jose, they don't know anybody who can help them make good choices and get it, which is like about as insulting as you can possibly. They got to go to the AJCCC, whatever. Like, well, they probably know their uncle and their whomever, right? They know a bunch of people that are helping them get ahead. But systems don't have a way to receive those people or activate those people. And systems frequently do not value CBOs with the type of precision and understanding that allows CBOs to be key actors, to be front doors and on-ramps. And they certainly don't invest in them, as Erica mentioned. So I think, and yet they're doing the work of the system. Most of the time people are arriving at the system's door by the hard work and credibility of those CBOs. So I think there's something really interesting there. But then additionally, the navigator piece, I think there's an intelligence, I hope, that is emerging in the sector to understand, again, as I mentioned, when we talk to young people, they are crystal clear. It's not just like the one thing. I'm not just like the young parent. I am a young parent navigating a variety of other pieces, navigating a learning disability, navigating mixed documentation status in my family. And so they need a variety of pieces that come together synergistically. And we learned that when we built a navigator function very specifically that worked within re-engagement high schools, did specific preparation and connecting pieces, and bridged into post-secondary, in this case specifically community colleges, we got outstanding results because young people needed someone who could help the system to make sense to them, because the system is crazy and nonsensical, and the workforce board has one requirement, community colleges have another requirement that like may conflict with like the requirement of their transitional housing provider, or maybe confusing on when you can use the Pell Grant, when you can't. And so I think there are like very smart tweaks that you can build into the system. Maybe community colleges not funding more community college staff. Maybe funding outreach within CBOs that are experts in cultural competence or cultural humility and responsiveness, trauma-informed practice. I'm obviously a little bit worked up about that, but I think there's proven models. We don't have to look very far to find ways to do this. And sometimes it's like, can the system just get like a couple inches out of its own way to open the doors much wider and really be that open access institution of equity and economic mobility that we hope our community colleges could be.
I would echo so much, I think, of what Joe said, and want to maybe start my comment by saying I think community colleges are an incredibly powerful asset for workforce development and economic mobility. And that is especially true in California. Like, we are very lucky to have the system that we have of community colleges, that it is accessible and affordable and all those types of things. I do think that there is more thinking that needs to be done, and some potentially some difficult local and regional conversations though around really understanding, kind of to Joe's point, how are people really getting to that community college door, and how are people persisting through community college? In some cases, there is a very significant role where a CBO is providing support in all of those areas. And I think that we have some real opportunities with career pathway work specifically, when we have funded career pathway initiatives, whether through the state, direct federal, competitions and opportunities there, to really make sure that when we're having those initial conversations about designing programs, when we're thinking about how we are going to resource and staff a particular initiative in a particular community, I would just really echo what Joe said, in that I think that it sometimes is difficult for community colleges, I think, to step a little bit away from themselves as a system and sort of look to see who else in the community is really kind of a key part of this ecosystem that is making this happen, and kind of thinking about how that works. Because again, I couldn't overstate how valuable I think what happens in a community college is. I mean, we have community colleges that are so fantastic at integrating vocational ESL and basic skill development and occupational skills training, and just are really, really good at that. But taking a little bit of a step back and thinking about, what other supports is that refugee who's been in Sacramento for 3 years, how else are they being supported to learn about that program from a trusted person, to learn about how to apply for FAFSA in their own language, to have somebody sit and comb through all their weird overseas documents and try to figure out which document needs to be uploaded in what way. I mean, we had this isn't a California example, it's a Texas example, but we had a client in Texas who was so diligently trying to go to a community college for a healthcare training program, and would have been a terrific fit. And it has taken over a year because she cannot access her Pell Grant because her first name, her first given name, has more than 26 letters, and the form won't accept it, and we can't. I mean, it sounds hilarious, right? It's like, how could that even be a thing? But it is. And knowing that it is CBOs that are often playing that role of doing that kind of work, and really kind of thinking about how do we understand that when we are at that whiteboard doing that program design, putting together that funding proposal, and making sure that that work is resourced in the right way. And I really do say that because CBOs have no ability to do on some level what community college, like each organization has such a critical role to play, and community colleges, especially in California, are so good at that piece of skill development that we want to make sure that the whole system is working in a way that is sustainable and ensures very equitable access.
It seems like, given that there's an unprecedented surplus that is available briefly in the state between unexpected state income and federal resources that are coming, there is perhaps an opportunity in the next year or two to think about how creatively we might use these resources to bridge those gaps between systems. Thinking of community colleges, they are historically very lean, enrollment-driven machines, funded for enrollment, and it's been at a rate thousands of dollars less per student than UC, CSU, or even K-12. So historically, the focus on support services has not been robust. The idea that perhaps the marriage with CBOs and other partners can help, if done respectively and with resources all around, can help address that in ways that really meet the needs of students, clients, residents, I think is an exciting one that you're raising, Erica and Joe. So, it makes me think maybe we're pretty far into the conversation. It might be a good time then to think a little bit about, well, with resources coming and the state budget, and we're entering the final days of budget negotiation. I'm kind of curious if you think there's specific opportunities or things that you're hoping to see agreement on, in the budget, or if there are things missing from the budget discussion that are prompted by what we've been talking about. So anyone want to think about that?
Okay. By the way, thank you for talking about community colleges. I wish I was in my office. I proudly display my associate's degree on my wall before all the other fancy degrees that I got. I'm proud, a community college guy. And which brings me to people don't often think of those with developmental disabilities in college and put them together. We actually support a number of people to get through college, just need a little bit of help and they can graduate. And that's what we essentially have in front of the legislature is support for direct support professionals. Our industry, 350,000 people receiving services across the state, and the rates of reimbursements to pay direct support professionals, DSPs, is basically at 1991 levels. And so what you have are people who are relied upon to deliver these life-supporting services often, and being held at poverty wages based upon what the state is willing to reimburse. And one of the things that we put forward, and thanks to the speaker and the Senate Pro Tem for agreeing, is a multi-year comprehensive rate study that says, hey, you need about $1.4 billion more so you can start really serving people. They both agreed to that, and we're hoping that the executive branch will sign off, which historically has been resistant because the attitude is, well, at any dollar amount, are people with developmental disabilities, can their lives be any better? And it's a tough thing for, I think, those of us who hold maybe more progressive, deeply held progressive values, to then encounter that the rhetoric doesn't match up with the alleged belief system. And I think we're at a moment where we need to forcefully say, hey, don't give me your speech, write a check. I'll leave it with, when I was in the 80s, I remember I had a pastor at this church. He used to say, show me your checkbook and I'll show you your values. And I would say the same thing to the state of California. This is when they need to step up and really help close that gap. You can't mandate poverty wages for the people who are relying upon funding from the state of California to fund them, and then say, but you need to deliver comprehensive services. The two can't coexist.
I like that. I'm going to quote you there. Don't give me a speech, write a check. Joe, Erica, anybody want to comment on the budget process that's going on right now, what you'd like to see, what we need to really pay attention to or push for?
We one of the pieces that COIN has pushed that is in the budget and we would like to see continued, grown over time, is investment in higher ed training partnerships. And there's a note earlier about job quality, the importance of job quality, and I think higher ed training partnerships in the initial. I guess I somehow landed on a community of practice call for the higher ed training partnerships that I don't think I was supposed to be on. And I was listening to and it was the most positive workforce conversation I had heard in California ever. It was amazing. People were talking about employer engagement, like really sincere partnerships with employers. They were talking about really thoughtfully constructed curriculum, wraparound support services, solving problems in real time to get folks the resources they need, rethinking internal resources to make sure they could get folks just, like I said earlier, cash to solve problems. And so we had pushed to A, grow higher ed training partnerships, and B, make sure that opportunity youth were named as a priority population in developing future HRTPs. That seems like a really profound example where you can think deeply with an employer about what their talent needs are, build custom training programs to them, but then really build it with the robustness that it can truly serve the economically vulnerable folks in our community. And you can do it with the intentionality around cultural competence and responsiveness that makes that a safe and comfortable place for folks to be experientially. So just a quick note to say that is in the budget this year. Again, Sean, who was here, has done a lot of work to push that for COIN, and hopefully we can folks can continue to reinforce that as a really unique and powerful framework.
I would maybe add on to that, and I see a question that I think has come in kind of around apprenticeships too, and obviously there's some overlap between high road training partnerships and apprenticeships. And one of the things that is, I think, so important, I echo Joe's enthusiasm around the model. It's very positive. You can look at many years of WIOA data, and you see that for like WIOA Title I participants, hands down, year over year, the highest wages of Title I enrolled individuals are for folks who go through apprenticeship programs, right? And so I think like we know as a system that these kinds of things work. Apprenticeships and similar types of earn and learn programs are also getting at the crux of what several of us have talked about today, which is that part of the challenge is that if you're stuck in a low wage job or two low wage jobs and you're just trying to make rent, you don't have the time to do training. So for all of those reasons, like apprenticeships, high road training partnerships, those are all very important. The dark side of apprenticeships, though, is that they are also, without exception, the least diverse in terms of participants, right? So we have some real equity challenges in apprenticeships. So yes, the wages tend to be the highest from those kinds of programs, but when you look nationally, like less than 10% of apprenticeship participants are women. People of color in apprenticeship programs still earn less than their identical peers who are not people of color. So what I would like to see in terms of a state budget is really see some opportunities for, yes, we want to continue to put these types of strategies forward, high road training partnerships and apprenticeships, but we need to do more to ensure that we are building in accountability for equity, but also resources for equity. I mean, by just one example, and there's lots of other things we could talk about, but we won't today. There's a lot of emerging evidence that pre-apprenticeship programs that are based in community-based organizations that help get people ready to participate in these apprenticeship programs that work and work well, but there's not really a way in which to fund pre-apprenticeship programs, right? There's like little kind of spots here and there, but there's kind of a gap of here's a model that we know might be helpful in really doing more on-ramps, but we don't really have a way to resource that. Again, there are ways, but there isn't like a system level way. Similarly, apprenticeship programs are time consuming to put together. We have lots of them in the building trades and related industries. We are starting to see them in other industries, including industries that employ more people of color and more women. But we need to interject some resources to make those things happen. They don't just come together overnight. And so I think there's some real opportunity to use these types of models, which we know can have good economic outcomes, but make sure that we are framing them and looking at them and really holding ourselves accountable to making sure that those models are being used in a way that advances equity. And there's budget decisions we can make to help support that.
So there's money on the table for apprenticeships and raising the question of equity, not only in who participates, but who succeeds in these programs. I would just want to note that one of the questions in the chat really also asked the question of how do we ensure that people of color and women are safe mentally and physically in these programs, and including mental health assistance and support for those with trauma and other barriers. We probably don't have much time, but I just wondered if any of you would comment briefly on that, and then we're going to close out the session because we're almost done. Eric, would you have any thoughts on that, or Ken, Joe?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a real good answer. And, I'm one of those people that it takes time for me to process and think deeply about these things. One thing that I would mention that, if we want to get more people of color into these programs, then it's definitely got to be a deep investment that starts early as well. When I worked at the Workforce Partnership, we actually put on an African American Achievement Summit. I don't really like the name African American Achievement Summit for the reasons that I had mentioned earlier, But one of the things that we did is we brought in a bunch of different apprenticeship programs just to start to expose some of the young adults to these programs young, just because we know how critical it is to get them into those types of programs. But it's a very nuanced question that, you know, hopefully maybe in a future session we could take some time to think through. And then just the last thing on the budget question, the two things that we're really hoping for is, one, get that $50 million for AB 628, because, you know, those are some critical funds that will support some community-based organizations. And then secondly, just continue to push for investments in, you know, localized community infrastructure in our nonprofit, because we believe that, you know, if we could continue to support those types of small organizations from the ground up, then that's going to increase labor force participation. So I just wanted to add that last piece.
Thank you, Eric. I feel like we've had a lively discussion, and we're just really now getting down into the nitty gritty and harder questions that we should be asking ourselves and each other about our systems. So, but we're out of time. So I really want to thank each and every one of you for such a thoughtful and deep discussion, and really for all the work that you're doing, and your organizations. I really respect and admire and have deepened that as I've listened to and worked with you today. So thank you too to the audience so much for sticking with us. And I know we're closing out, and you'll be going back to a plenary session momentarily. Thank you so much. I look forward to following up with you guys in the future.